Prologue. I wore a black suit and a white shirt, a black tie and black shoes, all polished and shiny, clothes that would normally make me feel uncomfortable, as if I were in a stolen uniform, or pretending to be an adult. Today they gave me comfort of a kind. I was wearing the right clothes for a hard day. I had done my duty in the morning, spoken the words I was meant to speak, and I meant them as I spoke them, and then the service was done. I got in my car and I drove, randomly, without a plan, with an hour or so to kill before I met more people I had not seen for years and shook more hands and drank too many cups of tea from the best china. I drove along winding Sussex County roads I only half remembered until I found myself headed down towards the town center. So I turned randomly down another road and took a left and a right. It was only then that I realized where I was going, where I had been going all along, and I grimaced at my own foolishness. I had been driving towards a house that had not existed for decades. I thought of turning around then as I drove down a wide street that had once been a flint lane beside a barley field, of turning back and leaving the past undisturbed, but I was curious. The old house, the one I had lived in for 7 years, from when I was 5 until I was 12, that house had been knocked down and was lost for good. The new house, the one my parents had built at the bottom of the garden, between the azalea bushes and the green circle in the grass we called the fairy ring, that had been sold 30 years ago. I slowed the car as I saw the new house. It would always be the new house in my head. I pulled up into the driveway, observing the way they had built out on the mid-70s architecture. I had forgotten that the bricks of the house were chocolate brown. The new people had made my mother's tiny balcony into a 2-story sunroom. I stared at the house, remembering less than I had expected about my teenage years. No good times, no bad times. I had lived in that place for a while as a teenager. It didn't seem to be any part of who I was now. I backed the car out of the driveway. It was time, I knew, to drive to my sister's bustling, cheerful house, all tidied and stiff for the day. I would talk to people whose existence I had forgotten years before, and they would ask me about my marriage, failed a decade ago, a relationship that had slowly frayed until eventually, as they always seemed to, it broke. And whether I was seeing anyone, I wasn't. I was not sure that I could, not yet. And they would ask about my children, all grown up. They have their own lives. They wish they could be here today. Work, doing fine, thank you, I would say, never knowing how to talk about what I do. If I could talk about it, I would not have to do it. I make art. Sometimes I make true art, and sometimes it fills the empty places in my life. Some of them, not all. We would talk about the departed. We would remember the dead. The little country lane of my childhood had become a black tarmac road that served as a buffer between 2 sprawling housing estates. I drove further down it, away from the town, which was not the way I should have been traveling, and it felt good. The slick black road became narrower, windier, became the single-lane track I remembered from my childhood, became packed earth and knobbly, bone-like flints. Soon I was driving slowly, bumpily, down a narrow lane with brambles and briar roses on each side. Wherever the edge was not a stand of hazel or a wild hedgerow. It felt like I had driven back in time. The lane was how I remembered it, when nothing else was. I drove past Caraway Farm. I remember being just 16 and kissing red-cheeked, fair-haired Callie Anders who lived there and whose family would soon move to the Shetlands, and I would never kiss her or see her again. Then nothing but fields on either side of the road. For almost a mile, a tangle of meadows. Slowly, the lane became a track. It was reaching its end. I remembered it before I turned the corner and saw it in all its dilapidated red-bricked glory, the Hempstocks farmhouse. It took me by surprise. although that was where the lane had always ended. I could have gone no further. I parked the car at the side of the farmyard. I had no plan. I wondered whether after all these years there was anyone still living there, or, more precisely, if the Hemstocks were still living there. It seemed unlikely, but then, from what little I remembered, they had been unlikely people. The stench of cow muck struck me as I got out of the car, and I walked gingerly across the small yard to the front door. I looked for a doorbell in vain, and then I knocked. The door had not been latched properly, and it swung gently open as I rapped it with my knuckles. I had been here, hadn't I? A long time ago. I was sure I had. Childhood memories are sometimes covered and obscured beneath things that come later, like childhood toys forgotten at the bottom of a crammed adult closet. But they are never lost for good. I stood in the hallway and called. "Hello? Is anybody there?" I heard nothing. I smelled bread baking and wax furniture polish and old wood. My eyes were slow to adjust to the darkness. I peered into it and was getting ready to turn and leave when an elderly woman came out of the dim hallway holding a white duster. She wore her gray hair long. I said, "Mrs. Hemstock?" She tipped her head to one side, looked at me. "Yes?" "I do know you, young man," she said. "I am not a young man, not any longer." "I know you, but things get messy when you get my age. Who are you exactly?" "I think I must have been about 7, maybe 8 the last time I was here." She smiled then. "You were Letty's friend, from the top of the lane. You gave me milk. It was warm from the cows, and then I realized how many years had gone by, and I said, 'No, you didn't do that. That must have been your mother who gave me the milk. I'm sorry.' As we age, we become our parents, live long enough, and we see faces repeat in time. I remembered Mrs. Hemstock, Letty's mother, as a stout woman. This woman was stick-thin, and she looked delicate. She looked like her mother, like the woman I had known as old Mrs. Hemstock. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see my father's face, not my own. And I remember the way he would smile at himself in mirrors before he went out. "Looking good," he'd say to his reflection approvingly. "Looking good." "Are you here to see Letty?" Mrs. Hemstock asked. "Is she here?" The idea surprised me. She had gone somewhere, hadn't she? America? The old woman shook her head. "I was just about to put the kettle on. Do you fancy a spot of tea?" I hesitated, then I said, if she didn't mind, I'd like it if she could point me towards the duck pond first. Duck pond? I knew Letty had a funny name for it. I remembered that. She called it the sea, something like that. The old woman put the cloth down on the dresser. "Can't drink water from the sea, can you? Too salty. Like drinking life's blood. Do you remember the way? You can get to it around the side of the house. Just follow the path." If you'd asked me an hour before, I would have said no. I did not remember the way. I do not even think I would have remembered Letty Hemstock's name. But standing in that hallway, it was all coming back to me. Memories were waiting at the edge of things, beckoning to me. Had you told me that I was 7 again, I might have half believed you for a moment. Thank you. I walked into the farmyard. I went past the chicken coop, past the old barn, and along the edge of the field, remembering where I was and what was coming next, and exulting in the knowledge. Hazels lined the side of the meadow. I picked a handful of the green nuts and put them in my pocket. The pond is next, I thought. I just have to go around this shed and I'll see it. I saw it and felt oddly proud of myself, as if that one act of memory had blown away some of the cobwebs of the day. The pond was smaller than I remembered. There was a little wooden shed on the far side, and by the path, an ancient, heavy wooden-metal bench. The peeling wooden slats had been painted green a few years ago. I sat on the bench and stared at the reflection of the sky and the water, at the scum of duckweed at the edges, and the half-dozen lily pads. Every now and again, I tossed a hazelnut into the middle of the pond that Letty Hemstock had called. It wasn't the sea, was it? She would be older than I am now, Letty Hemstock. She was only a handful of years older than I was back then, for all her funny talk. She was 11. What was I? It was after the bad birthday party, I knew that, so I would have been 7. I wondered if we had ever fallen in the water. Had I pushed her into the duck pond? That strange girl who lived in the farm at the very bottom of the lane? I remembered her being in the water. Perhaps she had pushed me in too. Where did she go? America? No. Australia. That was it. Somewhere a long way away. And it wasn't the sea, it was the ocean. Letty Hempstock's ocean. I remembered that, and remembering that, I remembered everything. Chapter 1. Nobody came to my 7th birthday party. There was a table laid with jellies and trifles, with a party hat besides each plate, and a birthday cake with 7 candles on it at the center of the table. The cake had a book drawn on it in icing. My mother, who had organized the party, told me that the lady at the bakery said that they had never put a book on a birthday cake before, and that mostly for boys it was footballs or spaceships. I was their first book. When it became obvious that nobody was coming, my mother lit the 7 candles on the cake and I blew them out. I ate a slice of the cake, as did my little sister and one of her friends, both of them attending the party as observers, not participants, before they fled, giggling, to the garden. Party games had been prepared by my mother, but because nobody was there, not even my sister, none of the party games were played, and I unwrapped the newspaper past the parcel gift myself, revealing a blue plastic Batman figure. I was sad that nobody had come to my party, but I was happy that I had a Batman figure, and there was a birthday present waiting to be read, a box set of the Narnia books, which I took upstairs. I lay on the bed and lost myself in the stories. I liked that. Books were safer than other people anyway. My parents had also given me a Best of Gilbert and Sullivan LP to add to the 2 that I already had. I had loved Gilbert and Sullivan since I was 3, when my father's youngest sister, my aunt, took me to see Iolanthe, a play filled with lords and fairies. I found the existence and nature of the fairies easier to understand than that of the lords. My aunt had died soon after, of pneumonia, in the hospital. That evening my father arrived home from work, and he brought a cardboard box with him. In the cardboard box was a soft-haired black kitten of uncertain gender, whom I immediately named Fluffy, and which I loved utterly and wholeheartedly. Fluffy slept on my bed at night. I talked to it, sometimes with my little sister, when my little sister was not around, half expecting it to answer in a human tongue. It never did. I did not mind. The kitten was affectionate and interested and a good companion for someone whose 7th birthday party had consisted of a table with iced biscuits and a blancmange and a cake and 15 empty folding chairs. I do not remember ever asking any of the older children in my class at school why they had not come to my party. I did not need to ask them. They were not my friends, after all. They were just people I went to school with. I made friends slowly when I made them. I had books, and now I had my kitten. We would like Dick Whittington and his cat. We would be like Dick Whittington and his cat, I knew, or, if Fluffy proved particularly intelligent, we would be the miller's son and Puss in Boots. The kitten slept on my pillow, and it even waited for me to come home from school, sitting on the driveway in front of my house by the fence, until a month later it was run over by the taxi that brought the Opal miner to stay at my house. It was not there when it happened. I was not there when it happened. I got home from school that day, and my kitten was not waiting to meet me. In the kitchen was a tall, rangy man with tan skin and a checked shirt. He was drinking coffee at the kitchen table. I could smell it. In those days, all coffee was instant coffee, a bitter, dark brown powder that came out of a jar. "I'm afraid I had a little accident arriving here," he told me cheerfully. "But not to worry. His accent was clipped, unfamiliar. It was the first South African accent I had heard. He, too, had a cardboard box on the table in front of him. "The black kitten, was he yours?" he asked. "It's called Fluffy," I said. "Yeah, like I said, accident coming here. Not to worry. Disposed of the corpse. Don't have to trouble yourself. Dealt with the matter. Open the box." "What?" He pointed to the box. "Open it." The opal miner was a tall man. He wore jeans and checked shirts every time I saw him except the last. He had a thick chain of pale gold around his neck that was gone the last time I saw him too. I did not want to open the box. I wanted to go off on my own. I wanted to cry for my kitten, but I could not do that if someone else was there watching me. I wanted to mourn. I wanted to bury my friend at the bottom of the garden, past the green grass fairy ring and the rodent bush cave, back past the heap of grass cuttings where nobody ever went but me. The box moved. "Bought it for you," said the man. "Always pay my debts." I reached out, lifted the top flap of the box, wondering if this was some kind of joke, if my kitten would be in there. Instead, a ginger face stared up at me truculently. The opal miner took the cat out of the box. He was huge. A ginger-striped tomcat, missing half an ear. He glared at me angrily. This cat had not liked being put in a box. He was not used to boxes. I reached out to stroke his head, feeling unfaithful to the memory of my kitten, but he pulled back so I could not touch him, and he hissed at me. Then he stalked off to a far corner of the room where he sat and looked and hated. "There you go. Cat for a cat," said the opal miner, and he ruffled my hair with his leathery hand. Then he went out into the hall, leaving me in the kitchen with the cat that was not my kitten. The man put his head back through the door. "He's called Monster," he said. It felt like a bad joke. I propped open the kitchen door so the cat could get out. Then I went up to my bedroom and lay on my bed and cried for the dead Fluffy. When my parents got home that evening, I do not think my kitten was even mentioned. Monster lived with us for a week or more. I put cat food in the bowl for him in the morning and again at night, as I had for my kitten. He would sit by the back door until I or someone else let him out. We saw him in the garden, slipping from bush to bush, or in trees, or in the undergrowth. We could trace his movements by the dead blue tits and thrushes we would find in the garden, but we saw him rarely. I missed Fluffy. I knew you could not simply replace something alive, but I dared not grumble to my parents about it. They would have been baffled at my upset, after all. If my kitten had been killed, it had also been replaced. The damage had been made up. It all came back to me. Even as it came back, I knew it would not be for long. All the things I remembered, sitting on the green bench beside the little pond that Letty Hemstock had once convinced me was an ocean. All right, we'll pick up with Chapter 2 probably tomorrow. And until then, I hope you are safe. I hope you are happy. I hope you are doing well.